Well, hi, Deconstructionist listeners. This is Science Mike, and before you get started with your beloved podcast, I've got a quick bit of exciting news to share with you. I'm going on tour this fall to support my new book, Finding God in the Waves, with a series of special events, including Ask Science Mike live appearances. The dates announced so far are going to be in Tallahassee, Denver, Nashville, Columbus, Atlanta, Chicago, and Grand Haven, as well as Portland. Now, if you're going to come to any of those, I'd love to see you, but pay special attention to the Columbus, Ohio event, because I heard that the Deconstructionist crew themselves are going to be there. So I'd love to hang out with you and the hosts of one of my favorite podcasts at the same time. You can learn more by going to findinggodinthewaves.com/tour. Thanks, and I hope to see you soon.
Know when you're in a mind control cult, when someone is telling you, don't read a book because you'll be in sin, it's like, run and read it. You know, if someone's telling you something on that level, you know that there's something really wrong. And have faith in your own intelligence and your own ability to read and think about whether or not something is real or something is true or not.
The Deconstructionist podcast is produced by Nicholas Rowe at the National Audio Preservation Society Recording Studio in Newark, Ohio.
Follow us on social media at www.thedeconstructionist.com, on Facebook at Deconstructionist Podcast, Twitter at DeconstructCast, and Instagram at Deconstructionist Podcast.
If listening to this podcast has benefited you in any way, or if you have connected with it, or it's resonated somewhere with you, consider making a donation. Even the smallest donations go to help John and I maintain healthy relationships with our wives and keeps their blood pressure at a healthy level. The donate link is in the show notes, or you can visit our website and click the donate tab. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. We are your hosts. I am Adam Narlock.
And I am John Williamson.
What do we got?
Boy, do we have a treat for you.
What do we have here, John?
We have... Look, every once in a while, we like to go off the beaten path.
This is
just a little.
This is great off the beaten path material.
But yet it still applies.
Oh my gosh.
Especially with in the current context of what's going on around the world with the rise of ISIS or ISIL or whatever in the world it's called right now.
Whatever the hell it's called.
I don't even know.
Scientology.
Yes.
Weird stuff going on all over the place. The media has gone completely nuts.
Crazy.
Have you noticed how nuts the media is?
I don't even pay attention to it anymore.
I can't watch the news anymore.
Nope. I watch Canadian news where they talk about the new speed bump they put in. That to me is I feel a lot less of a mess as a human being after watching your news. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Canada.
So who is this? What do we got here? What tasty treat
did you
line up for us? Because this is all you, man. This is your thing.
So I heard this guy on a podcast probably almost 2 years ago now. He's on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes too, right?
Definitely.
That's a good podcast.
Yeah, you guys should listen to that one because he does 3-hour-long podcasts. And so he had this guy for 3 hours.
Right. Ours is not that long.
No. But his name is Steve Hassan, and he is considered one of the foremost experts in regards to cults.
Yeah.
Or destructive kind of...
mind controlling
institutions, organizations, if you will. So this week we spoke to Steve, and he was, I should say, a part of one of the biggest cults back in the 70s
Dude,
as a youngster out of college.
I still can't believe it. I mean, I'm sitting here going, are you serious right now? Like when he tells his story?
Yeah. And like a
Super-
high-ranking member, too.
Super nuts. Yeah, he was like the Tom Cruise of the Moonies.
He was. Selling flowers outside grocery stores, you know?
I'm sorry, Steve, that I just called you Tom Cruise.
Yeah, yeah. He's a handsome man. I mean,
Absolutely.
just fewer movie credits, I think. So, but Steve was he tells his story a little bit in this episode, which is just absolutely fascinating. I think you guys will enjoy that. He is, after though his time in the Moonies, he became a licensed mental health counselor, and a nationally certified counselor, and basically went into, psychology and counseling and, tried to figure out like what makes these organizations tick. Like, how could I, as an intelligent, individual, how could I have fallen prey to this, and what tactics do these groups use? And
how did this happen?
Dude,
How did this happen? That's basically like what his work all seeks to address.
Yeah.
How does this happen? How can we keep this from happening?
Right.
How can we keep our minds free?
How can you help friends and family members that fall prey to this as well? So he's written a couple books. We'll have in the show notes that are best-selling guides to protection, rescue, and recovery from destructive cults. And this dude has been on numerous TV shows: 60 Minutes, Fox News, Larry King Live, Good Morning America, CNN, The Today Show, and on and on and on.
Oprah, Dr. Phil,
Nightline, NPR.
I mean, dude, yeah, he is highly, highly sought after. And you know what? After interviewing him, now I know why.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy could go all day. We barely had to ask him questions. I mean, he's just a absolute well of information.
Unbelievable.
That is so interesting. I was totally gripped that whole interview.
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend his book. I plowed through this thing. I mean, it took a little bit. It's a fairly sizable book. He's added additional chapters over the years. I think it was originally written, and this is just off the cuff, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. I think it was late 80s.
So he's added various other case studies and just stories and other organizations that have cropped up since then, including sex trafficking and the fact that they use similar tactics, and terrorist organizations like ISIS and ISIL use similar tactics. So it's all encompassing, and it's fascinating because it involves other groups beyond just the normal, crazy documentaries that we all like to watch, like The Family.
And you would think that after his experience and all of his education, that he would be somebody who is deeply anti-religious.
Yeah.
You would think that like he would basically be calling all religions like a form of mind control. And I know there's probably a lot of listeners out here that kind of feel that way.
Right.
But you're going to see something a little bit different from what he says. And we'll just let the interview speak for itself a little bit here.
Yeah. So without further ado, here is Steve freaking Hassan.
In the state of huntress, you see me as I am, and I see you as you are, more than a physical scar. So come on, let it all fall down and wrap the sheets around. Hold me, wash your body, make it easy.
Well, Steve Hassan, we are delighted to have you on the Deconstructionist podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for your patience.
Absolutely. One of the questions we like to ask just to start off our guests so that our audience can get a little background is just how if you could tell us a little bit about how you were raised. Were you raised in a particularly religious household and that sort of thing? And what part of the country are you from?
So I'm from Flushing, Queens, New York. I was born in 1954, so I turned 62 this past May. And I was raised in a conservative Jewish upbringing where my family kept kosher, and I went to temple on Saturdays. and pretty much was bar mitzvahed, and by that point was disillusioned with the Judaism that I
Wow.
was taught as a very formal, like God as a Zeus-like being out there somewhere, and you should follow the rules, and otherwise you should feel guilty. And I just really could not relate to any God that, was happy that the firstborn was killed, even though the central Exodus story is so, major in Judaism. And honestly, still identified strongly as a Jew, felt, was educated about the Holocaust, went to Israel. I was on a archaeological dig in the Negev desert at Tel Beersheba,
Wow.
the famous biblical city of Beersheba.
Wow.
But in my story, I basically was dumped by my girlfriend when I was an upper junior in college, and 3 women who pretended to be students there recruited me into a front group of the Moon Cult, which most young people have no idea what that is. But if you Google Sun Myung Moon, Washington Times, mass weddings, you can learn about this demagogue who is now deceased, but he claimed to be 10 times greater than Jesus Christ. Buddha, Mohammed all have bowed to him in the spirit world, along with dead presidents and other spiritual luminaries. And I spent 2.5 years in this delusionary extremist belief system that we needed to destroy the evil democracy and set up a theocracy to establish God's kingdom on the earth and create the kingdom of heaven and the Garden of Eden. And it was going to be through Moon and his family and these mass weddings and stadiums of strangers to each other.
Holy cow.
And I had a radical personality change. And in my story, I was made to be a top American leader, groomed by Moon himself and several other top leaders. And I fell asleep at the wheel of a van due to sleep exhaustion and crashed the van and broke my leg rather seriously. And it was when I was away from the group in the hospital that I reached out to my sister, who I was always very close with, and she lured me home to see her son, my nephew, I had never met because I was in the cult, and made her promise not to tell my parents that I was visiting because they were evil and satanic. They were my physical parents, and Moon and his wife were my true parents.
Wow, man.
I believed. And fortunately, she broke her promise, told my parents. They hired some ex-Moonies. And there was a 5-day deprogramming in which it started involuntarily, became voluntary, and then I woke up on the 5th day and went, oh my God, what happened to me?
Whoa.
Like, how could I have ever believed that Moon was the Messiah? This is so crazy. And
it was that dramatic. It was that like
it was very dramatic. So in my experience, I had this new pseudo identity that was so elitist and black and white, us versus them, and do whatever Father orders without hesitation, because Satan is about to invade me at any moment if I don't, do immediately what God tells me to do.
Oh my gosh.
And my real self was suppressed utterly to the point where they asked me to throw away my poetry, and I threw away 400 original works to demonstrate my loyalty. Cut off from my family, dropped out of college, donated my bank account, and so
Good grief.
And in the in the news lately, we're hearing about ISIS, we're hearing about traffickers, we're hearing about all kinds of extreme radical personality shifts of people, and in my opinion, it's the same phenomenon, just 2016 instead of 1976. So it's internet oriented and much more sophisticated even than what I experienced. But so in my waking up moment, and it was actually the ex-members asking me to read one of Moon's speeches. So they weren't like telling me I was thinking wrong. They were just really encouraging me to think.
Oh my
And like, what do I
gosh.
think of this? And what do I think of that? And they asked me to read this document that the cult had published about how Moon was talking to senators and congressmen, and he was saying to them, one issue of controversy is that I am brainwashing American youth. I have one question to this audience of distinguished American ladies and gentlemen. Are Americans really that foolish? Could they really be brainwashed by me, Reverend Moon, a Korean? I know your answer is no. My answer is no, too. I respect Americans very much, and no American is so foolish. And as soon as I finished reading that sentence, I had a critical thought for the first time in 2.5 years of what a snake,
Wow.
what a lie, what a liar. I had heard him no less than 100 times in person say how stupid Americans were and how the Koreans were the master race and how our brains were dirty and they needed to be brainwashed. And I had 3 former members right in front of me saying, I was that foolish. They lied. They lied to us.
Oh
we
my
did not
gosh.
we did not have informed consent when we were being recruited. We did not know what was happening to us. We were lured to an isolated location and they indoctrinated us into this extremist belief system.
So, could you tell us just a little bit more about how you were lured? I know we're probably going to get into some of that stuff in a little bit, but I remember hearing a little bit more about this in the past, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that specific part of the bio.
I can tell you about my story, or I can talk more generically about, modern day lures. But I mean, in my case, pre-internet, recruiters relied on asking really penetrating, good questions to people, and people being willing to share everything about what they thought and their upbringing and their relationship with their parents and their siblings and what they majored in and their hopes and their dreams and their fears. These days, you can go on Facebook and read, and find out all kinds of much more detailed information about people. So in that sense, it's much easier to manipulate people now than back in the 70s. But I mean, for me, these women were flirting with me.
Wow.
I mean, it was really that simple. I was not looking to change religions. I was not looking to drop out of college. And they represented themselves as part of a student movement, wanting to make the world a better place. And being Jewish, I was raised with a consciousness to improve myself and to improve the world. So that was a match for me. And then it was an invitation to a free dinner. And then the free dinner had a free lecture. And I was asking questions, and they would be like, "That's a really good question. We'll get to that later." Which is when I'm giving talks and preventive education talks. My one of my messages is be an educated consumer, do independent research before you put yourself in the direct sights of any recruiter of any group. Maybe the group's legitimate, maybe it's not. But if the group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. It will people will actually answer your questions.
That's great.
Specific way, whereas the destructive groups are going to change, deflect, turn it around on you, all kinds of different manipulation patterns. And and the burden of proof is if somebody says we have something better, or we have something different that's better than anything else, the burden of proof is on them to prove it and not on us to disprove it. And anyone who's doing the hard sell, like, Armageddon's going to happen any moment. And if it happens right now, are you going to be ready?
Yeah.
Gotta get you over and baptize you because your soul is at risk,
Man.
Yeah.
Come on over. We'll take care of you because you want to be invaded by evil spirits. Well, I don't believe in evil spirits. Well, they believe in you. Just because you don't believe in them doesn't mean they don't believe in you and want you.
Man.
And I should also add, I know I'm dating myself, but in 1974, The Exorcist movie came out.
Yes.
And Moon actually rented an entire theater in Manhattan and bussed 300 members to watch The Exorcist movie, then brought us up to Tarrytown, where he gave a speech about how God made The Exorcist movie. And this movie was a prophecy of what would happen to people if they left the Unification Church.
Oh,
My mouth is just hanging wide open right now. Yeah.
I believed it. And I grew up not believing in Satan at all, being a Jew. And I was afraid of my thoughts. I was afraid of evil entities. I was afraid if I was nodding out, it was because of evil spirits and not because I was only sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night and I needed 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. I know you mentioned that in your book, the idea of devils and the different forms that they can manifest for various cults and the way that they kind of use, family members and friends kind of against you and you isolate you from them. So talk about that a little bit. I thought that was fascinating.
So, at the point that I woke up, one of the books that helped me the most was Robert J. Lifton's book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. He was an Air Force psychiatrist studying Chinese communist brainwashing of the 1950s. And his famous chapter 22, he outlined 8 criteria that any environment may be judged as a brainwashing environment. So it gave me a framework for understanding what the process was, because when I was in the Moonies, I didn't feel brainwashed. I thought I was having a true religious experience.
Right.
But then as I exited, I just was needing to read books on psychology and influence and brainwashing and persuasion and just to do self-therapy also, because I was recruiting and indoctrinating people, but not with anyone explaining what all the mechanisms and techniques were. I was just kind of doing what I was told to do and modeling myself after older members. One of the early books I read in 1976 was by Eric Hoffer called The True Believer. And he wrote in 1954 that I'm paraphrasing now, but the strength and effectiveness of a mass movement could be judged by the vividness and tangibility of its devils.
Whoa, interesting.
And as I evolved my work, became a licensed mental health professional, became an author, I evolved a model based on Lifton's model, which I called the BITE model of mind control. The B stands for behavior control mechanisms. The I stands for information control mechanisms. The T is for thought control, and the E is emotional control. And the reason I'm spelling that out right now to get back to fear is that, it turns out that phobias and fear, along with guilt, is one of the most universal mind control techniques to short circuit people's rational, critical, logical minds, and make people, triggering their amygdala and their deepest brain stem, old brain functions for survival, and this installation of irrational fears that if you question the leader or the doctrine or the organizational policy, terrible things are going to happen to you. And in my book, Freedom of Mind, I have a whole chapter on the most common phobias I've encountered in my 40 years of helping people. Things like, if you leave, you'll get cancer. If you leave, you'll get hit by a car. If you leave, you'll be unloved. If you leave, you'll be possessed by evil spirits. If you leave, and I have like 4 pages single spaced of the most common phobias, and it's part of how I help people wake up and get out of these groups, is to show them how universal phobia indoctrination is by showing them how other groups, not theirs in the beginning, how other groups that they would immediately agree are really cults and are really bad. And then after I make the case for how those phobias exist to control people and all these other organizations, then I ask them, so tell me, do you think it's possible for you to leave your group and be happy and fulfilled?
Wow.
Man.
And then I give a long silence. Like, have you ever met someone who's left your organization and is spiritual and happy and fulfilled? And then there's this long silence. And then if they're really programmed, they're going to say, no, it's not possible for someone to be happy if they leave Father, or if they leave the Children of God, or if they leave Scientology, or if they leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. Because you're leaving God. You're leaving God's people. You're leaving the chance for salvation.
Man.
And my work is, I am a Jew. I belong to a temple for 18 years. It's a very non-dogmatic temple where we are into asking questions as opposed to black and white, answers that people have to memorize. And the universals with all the three primary Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is the Garden of Eden story. However you want to understand that metaphor, that story, the God of all those religions understand that the Almighty Allah, could have made Adam and Eve robots, or could have made them slaves,
Right.
where they were completely obedient. But in the divine plan, God wanted them to have choice.
Freedom.
Yes.
And Almighty God, beyond space and time, must have known that they weren't going to be obedient too.
Right.
So any group that's coming into your face, into your life, saying, we are God's agents and you must do Chinese communist brainwashing techniques in order to be a devoted follower, is not following the divine plan. And it's a very effective, call to thoughtfulness and reason and reality testing for people to go, there are all these thousands of groups. They're all saying they're following God. They all have different rules. They all have different leaders. But look at these patterns of behavior control and information control and thought control and emotional control. These are universals.
Yes.
And it even applies to political organizations. It even applies to narcissistic personality disordered individuals who enslave an individual without any religion, just enslaving another human being.
Man.
Or a pimp who's enslaving a sex worker so that they can make a lot of money. It's the same mechanisms.
And am I right to think that the mechanism that you're speaking of primarily comes down to the root of fear, that they're using fear? Because one of the things that John and I noticed when we started this podcast is we are compelled in certain ways to open up what we call a safe place for people to just think for themselves, to take the journey for themselves, to not, we have this language that we throw around called people need to stop doing this thing we call belief by proxy. It's you've got a proxy, you've got the father or the mother or the priest or the pastor or the author or whoever, and it's that person and that's it. And you've got all of this unconscious bias, confirmation bias, that's all predicated on fear. And the thing that you said early on in our interview, you said, it'll stand up to scrutiny if it's true. If it's truly, truly true, it'll stand up to scrutiny. They will answer and welcome your questions. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about why fear is such an important thing to be aware of.
Well, I mean, it's one component, I would say, under the E of Bite model. I would say making people feel chosen, making people feel special, like they are the, elite, is also an important emotional manipulation. And I would also say guilt is also huge.
Yes.
That the standards of, you shouldn't masturbate, you shouldn't think of,
Right.
X, Y, and Z, and therefore you should feel guilty, or you should feel guilty because America dropped the atomic bomb in World War II, or you should feel guilty because your ancestors did X, Y, or Z. So I'd say that's feeling special and elite is a key part of the emotional manipulation, but feeling elite to the point where you're putting everyone else down,
Right.
as opposed to just feeling good about being alive and being blessed by God and feeling part of humanity. No, it's a one up,
It's
put down
superiority.
thing. Right.
Yeah.
So the truth is, as I see it, the human species is evolving, and we like to think that we're rational beings, but we're not. We like to think we're individuals, but in fact, we're hardwired neuropsychologically to conform to people in our environment. We're hardwired to follow who we consider to be legitimate authority figures. We're hardwired to following shortcuts.
Absolutely.
In the sense of scripts of you are, an American and therefore you should behave like this, this, and this, or you are in the military and you need to behave like this, this, and this.
Right.
You're a special agent and you need to have a phony name and go undercover and harm lots of people that your country tells you to go and harm because of some unknown leader up the ranks who tells you this is what you need to do.
Man.
Wow.
One
of the things that you kind of touched on a little bit that I would love for you to go into, because this was eye-opening for me as I read your book. You talk about in the book the various types of cults and what constitutes a cult.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because a lot of people I know out there, and you even mentioned this in your book, a lot of people listening would be surprised to hear that you also group in domestic abuse survivors, sex trafficking, even some multi-level marketing businesses and sweatshops. And I would say most of us would probably think of like the Branch Davidians, or our parents' generation would probably think of like the Moonies and some of the cults, like Jonestown and that sort of thing. So if you could, I know you talk about the four main types of cults. If you could go into that a little bit, I think that'd be really interesting.
Sure. So I guess I want to start by inviting everyone to imagine an influence continuum where a line to your left is ethical influence, healthy influence, and a line to the right is unethical influence. And understand themes of ethical influence respects your uniqueness, your individuality, your free will. It gives you informed consent, so people know what they're getting into. They're free to join. They're free to leave. There are checks and balances. Leaders are accountable and honest and responsible. So that's the left side. And I would add families. Healthy families want their children to grow up to be individuated, healthy adults. I would add that because there are family cults that are on the right side of the continuum where the goal is obedience and dependency. The goal is not to be your authentic self. It's to be the group self, or in the image of the leader self, a false self or pseudo self or cloned self. And so there's a split in the right side of the continuum, the destructive cult side of things, where you are suppressing your authentic self in order to be a good member, where you're suppressing your doubts, you're suppressing your feelings, you're mouthing the words, you're recruiting people, but in your conscience, in your heart, it's like dead.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to say to you and your listeners is that get out of the word cult as in and of itself a bad thing, but there are cults where you have freedom to join and freedom to leave, and you can be yourself, and you can be really into a video game or into a rock band or really into some, spiritual leader, but it's not, it's about love, it's about truth, it's about free will. And so great. But it's the dark side that I've focused the predominance of my work, to help people step back and get in touch with their real self, and to give themselves permission that to be in touch with their thoughts and their feelings, to know that they have choice, to know that there's more to life than just uttering the loaded language of the closed system. And so furthermore, so there's one-on-one cults of some narcissistic psychopath that makes people, could be a male or a female, that enslaves a person to become essentially isolated from family and friends and work for free and don't turn over all their money and do whatever pleases the other person. It also could be an unethical therapist who keeps people dependent instead of teaching them tools for how to function and move them out of the practice.
Man.
Could be a large group awareness training where they're saying, we're going to help you transform, but they really are interested in hooking you for the next workshop and the next workshop and the next workshop and recruiting all your family and friends,
Jeez.
even if you alienate them. Could be a multi-level marketing group where they make all these extreme promises for untested products, and they say you're going to be a millionaire part-time, and everybody's losing money. And the government has said this is a scam.
Wow.
A pyramid seems scam, but they're still using the same psychological techniques of sales and indoctrination. It could be a political party, could be a religious group, could be, North Korea is kind of the quintessential state-run, mind control cult.
Man.
Where one loves the great leader, or else they get shot, or they get put in jail, or they get exiled.
Unbelievable.
It's your choices. So the point is that I really want everyone to understand is freedom of mind. That's the meme. That's my company's name. And I want people to know it's your mind, and the locus of control for your mind should be in you, not in someone else. And so the locus of control should be with you, where you are able to have full access to your thoughts, your feelings, you have choices of your behavior, where you can read what you want to read and decide for yourself if it's true or not. I met with a woman in California last week who was in a Bible cult started by Kip McKean. I wrote about this group in my book, Combating Cult Mind Control. And she was actually present when Kip McKean held up my book in 1989, saying that I was a wolf in sheep's clothing. This was to a meeting of 15,000 believers in this cult.
Holy cow.
This shepherding discipleship cult, and basically marked me, even though I wasn't a member, and he basically said people would be in sin if they read my book or talked to me.
Good Lord.
That's when you know you've made it, right?
Yeah. Did you put that on your resume?
No, when you're in a mind control cult, when someone is telling you, don't read a book because you'll be in sin, it's like, run and read it. If someone's telling you something on that level, you know that there's something really wrong. And have faith in your own intelligence and your own ability to read and think about whether or not something is real or something is true or not.
When I was stoned, when I wasn't fully grown, I let calm wash over my feet. Let me rest my worry and laying down to the sea. hair is only silent.
That is so good, man. That is so good. You're touching on really kind of what John and I are all about in a lot of ways. We see. Well, let me phrase a question before I put words in your mouth. I want to ask you a question. The spectrum that you laid out. I get excited, Steve. I get very excited, so I'm excited right now. The spectrum that you laid out. I think it's really helpful for people to start to think in these terms of, what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Now, a conclusion I'm drawing from that myself that I want to get you to speak to is this isn't a binary, is it? It's not you're either in an unhealthy situation or you're in a completely healthy situation. Is there infiltrating in certain, harmless religious institutions, churches, organizations, some of the unhealthy that you don't have to necessarily get the heck out of there, but you can start to exhibit healthier functionality and participation in a group, even though you start to see some things happening, on a small level. I just think of any religious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not binary at all, and the four components are overlapping components. I mean, and the other thing is, so I have this graphic of the influence continuum that I just described in Combating Cult Mind Control at the end of Chapter 3. I have another graphic that I think is also important. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to take a snapshot of it and put it up on your podcast website, you're welcome to do it.
Thank you.
There's a pyramid. Then I have circles emanating from the base of the pyramid. And for me, you can be in the outside perimeters of a group and still be in a mind control cult. It's not going to be as extreme an experience as someone who's a staff member or someone who's living in some compound. Right? So there are different levels of involvement too. And some people can be in a group for 10 years and be at different points within the pyramid or outside of the pyramid, but they're still hooked. So I'll have people telling me, Tom Cruise, how could he be in a mind control cult? He's a wealthy actor. He flies around the world. Well, he's surrounded by Scientologists.
Wow. Yeah.
He's entirely, indoctrinated. So he's internalized the system of L. Ron Hubbard. And in my opinion, he's absolutely influenced and mind controlled, and despite all of the former leaders who've left who said he's never going to leave, I think everybody has the potential to wake up and leave, especially if you have a child and the child is not in. I think love is stronger than mind control.
That is awesome.
And I'm for love. I'm for the religion of love as opposed to fear and guilt.
Yes.
And unity as opposed to division.
Yes,
and,
we like those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and bringing out the best in each other and not the worst in each other, and finding common ground.
Oh, that's good.
Man, that's good stuff. Good juice, man.
So one of the things that I think, I just loved your book. I just want to put that out there right now. Adam's.
So did you write a review on Amazon?
Oh, I will. Right
Please
now,
do.
My copy is covered in yellow highlighter. So
yes.
But
Cool.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting, because I'll be honest, reading through this book is not only interesting because you put a lot of case studies and a lot of examples of other individuals who are members of various different cults and their experiences, but I think you dispelled a lot of misnomers, at least that I had, and I'm sure many others, who are listening and who will read the book, will notice as they go along. But one of them was where you kind of make the distinction between mind control and brainwashing, and the idea that we have this funny idea of what brainwashing is. Like anyone who's been to a university, they always bring in a hypnotist, and you always think, oh, it's my weak-minded friend who, you made him cluck like a chicken or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I think we kind of pass that misnomer on to people who join cults, right? We think that they are weak-minded and that they're fools, and I could never end up in a cult. And you completely dispel that. And so I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit, the difference between the two, and who do they target?
Okay, well, I would start by answering that the single most important principle of social psychology is called the fundamental attribution error. And what that error is, this is universal, so people around the world have the same bias, the same mistake. When people are trying to understand why other people do things, there's this overwhelming tendency to overestimate individual variables and underestimate social, environmental, contextual variables.
Yeah.
So why did Steve get into the Moonies? Steve must have been weak. He must have been stupid. He must have needed a strong authority figure. He must have been not had a good religious education, whatever. Versus Steve's girlfriend dumped him, 3 women flirted with him, lied to him, got all kinds of personal information from him, and systematically manipulated him to an isolated retreat where they controlled his behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions for 3 days. And he came to believe he had a spiritual experience, that God was calling him.
Man.
And so he changed his life. So the notion here that I want to say is that there are thousands and thousands of social psychology experiments that demonstrate that we are biological organisms that are wired with mirror neurons, where we are adapting to people in our environment unconsciously all the time, where we are following people who speak charismatically, who may be a senior in our church or in our synagogue or whatever, and we are going to want to listen to them and expect that what they're saying is true, versus that they're lying or they're a manipulator. We're going to give people the benefit of the doubt. And that likewise with the Zimbardo prison study, that if we're put in an environment and we're given scripts, you're the prisoner, you're the guard, you're going to behave as if that's what your role is.
Oh, right.
And you put someone in a one down position where you have a number, you're no longer a person, you have a number, and you're wearing a chain around your ankle, and I'm a prison guard, and I have a billy club, and I get mirrored sunglasses. You're going to change how people behave towards each other.
Man.
It's just human nature. So wake up, everybody, and stop, looking at some of the people doing terrorist acts saying, oh, they're really, psychos. Some of them are, but a lot of people are from middle class, upper class families, high education, and they were deceptively recruited online typically and indoctrinated into ISIS's worldview, which is black and white, us versus them, good versus evil. We're the underdogs, but God has summoned you, and you, to do the great work to save the planet.
Man.
And a lot of people, and I should also add, they use video game music and video game analogies. They use movies like The Matrix. They're calling on social cultural memes and associations that young people especially are going to resonate with. Now, going back to your comment about college hypnotists, so there's a lie that most college hypnotists tell in all their presentations, which is that you will never do something in a trance that you wouldn't ordinarily agree to do.
Really?
Yeah, that's just not true. It's convenient in terms of sucking people into going on stage and oftentimes making fools of themselves. But I don't know too many people who would want to be made a fool of intentionally in front of an audience.
No.
That's a good point.
I unintentionally make a fool of myself a lot.
Yeah.
Right, me too. But the thing about hypnosis is that it is not sleep. It is actually an altered state of consciousness where you have high concentration, high absorption, and your critical, rational reasoning ability is mostly offline. So you are entering into the flow.
Very vulnerable.
So I don't know anyone who's a great sports figure or musician or dancer who doesn't want to get into that state so they can perform at a much higher level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you, for example, I like to play basketball. So if you're a professional basketball player and you want to get 90% free throw shots, you have to be able to learn how to negatively hallucinate sound, like all the fans screaming and yelling at you and all the other players trash talking you to try to distract you. You have to be able to not hear any of that. You have to be able to negatively hallucinate all the people who are waving their arms and other things that are behind the backboard. You have to just see the hoop, and you just have to see in your mind the ball leaving your fingertips going through the net. And the more you have control of that state of consciousness, the better a player you're going to be.
Wow.
And so the point is not that being in an altered state is a bad thing. It's on the continuum. Who's in control of it? Ideally, you're in control of your own state, and you're not in the environment with someone with an ulterior motive or an agenda to get you into their worldview or to get you into their organization.
Man.
And that's why when people are ushered into a room and the person at the front says, "Okay, before we begin, let's do a meditation. Everybody close your eyes and float." And I'm not going to do anything further, but I do yoga. I've been to a lot of meditation retreats. There's some that are really clean. There are some that are really dirty and with bad agendas. And you want to do your research before you're in the environment, before you're listening to any CDs of people that are free on the internet. Here, listen to my free meditation thing. Well, why is it free?
Yeah. Oh, because I want to help you.
Right. So there was this former diamond cutter named Roy Masters. He was a cult leader. I wrote about him in the book, and he had a radio show called "How Your Mind Can Keep You Free." And he was saying that he was teaching people meditation, but he was just doing hypnosis, getting people to listen to his meditations daily, and then they would tune in and listen to him on the radio and get their programming. And he claimed to be sinless. He claimed to be able to do exorcisms.
Just all kinds of
Wow.
stuff. Man.
Not a healthy person, not a good group. No. Be careful, be careful, be careful.
So I've got a question for you. One of the things we've noticed doing this podcast and in all the research and exploring that John and I have done is all about this thing that you called religious experience. Some people call it mysticism, having experiential knowledge of the divine, of the spiritual. It's not just, a lot of people are kind of choking on the Enlightenment and on modernity and on this overly cerebral approach to spirituality. And there's this rise of mysticism. There's this rise of a thirst for experience. I mean, yoga clinics, yoga places popping up all over the place. The self-help spirituality section of Barnes & Noble is growing at rapid proportions. And there's this rise of a want for this. Now, you mentioned that when you got recruited to the Moonies, that you had a, quote, true religious experience, but you realized that was manufactured. In this rise of this thirst for religious experience and mysticism, what are some things that people can be careful of while wanting to experience spirituality?
What do they should be careful of?
Yeah, so you had a, quote, religious experience, but it was an unhealthy religious experience. It was manufactured. How do you see a potential for danger in this rise of a thirst for a mystical experience of the divine, experience of spirituality that's really coming on pretty strong in our culture?
Well, I think it's a good thing that people are thirsty for something more.
Yes.
It's clear that a lot of institutions have failed us, political institutions, religious institutions. But do your homework and find out who is this person, this
Mm,
leader. What is his or her
mm,
background? Does he have a criminal record?
mm.
Does he claim a PhD? From where? Go and check. Is it legitimate or not? It's amazing how many people just do the big lie and assume, and people will go to a website and say, assume that it's true because they say it, and it's not true. And, if you value yourself, you'll spend more time learning how to be a good consumer. And that's what I'm hoping when people read my book or look at any number of the free videos on my website or come on our Facebook, that they'll understand that really intelligent people who want more out of their lives have been deceived and manipulated into really unhealthy situations. And, especially, I'm wary of crazy wisdom traditions where the leader is raping, underage girls and saying, "Well, I'm enlightened, so I know what's best for them."
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like, huh?
Yeah. It's like, come on. In what universe is that okay?
Right, but they would say that because they're beyond space and time. Well, look at the fellow Shoko Asahara who did the sarin gassing in Tokyo. He convinced his brilliant followers, in many cases, lawyers, doctors, military, police, that because he was enlightened, if they died in a sarin attack at his hand, they'd go instantly to paradise.
Amazing.
Oh, jeez.
It's stupid.
Oh my
But
gosh.
but if you accept the assumption that he's a superior being who has greater wisdom, it's like go into yourself and find that greater wisdom,
Mm.
not outside. And in my experience, the most spiritual people I've met have been the most humble, the most kind, the most compassionate, the least egotistical, not asking for money, not asking for power, not asking for glory. They just do the right thing and try to live impeccably. Those are the kind of people you want to hang out with. And
Yeah.
I am someone who loves altered states of consciousness things. I do self-hypnosis, I do meditation, I do yoga, I go scuba diving, I go deep scuba diving. I love listening to the sound of my breath when I'm underwater, floating with the fish. For me, that's the closest thing to being with God that exists.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I love where you took that, because that actually kind of goes into my next question here, which is that I love this quote that you have. I'm going to quote you from the book here, that faith can be a wonderful thing if it's balanced by critical thinking. And I just would love for you to talk a little bit about how, despite the fact that you had this extraordinarily negative religious experience as a youth, you've been able to kind of find a religious life later in life here. And you've mentioned, I think it was before we started recording, that you've been practicing a religious life for the last 18 years or so. So if you could talk about that a little bit, I think that'd be really interesting.
Sure. So a common mistake people leave when they leave a totalist religious group is the phenomenon of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just wanting to be separate from whatever it was. So if it was a meditation group, they unless they've gotten good counseling, unless they've really done their processing of what happened to them, they might say no to any meditation experience ever again in their life, which is a great shame. Or if they were in a Bible cult, they might never want to open a Bible or go to a church meeting. And I just believe in being a spiritual consumer. I guess I've always believed in a divine that's not like an anthropomorphized projection of humanity,
Yes.
but like something beyond but something that brings us all together on this space-time continuum. And however I understand God, all the scientific laws have to apply too. So I'm really into physics. I have a friend who's a radio astronomer studying black holes. Like, for me, it's just utterly fascinating how little we really know about what is real.
Yeah.
So for me, that elicits a state of awe
Yes.
and wonder. And again, the really evolved people that I've met, the older they get, the more humble they get, because they realize how little they know in the span of everything that is.
Man, that is so true.
And in my case, I looked at Christianity in many different forms. I went to churches, I went to mosques, I went to Buddhism, different forms of Buddhism, Taoism, atheism, and I always felt like a Jew deep down in my pores. And I guess it was about 19 or 20 years ago, the Reform movement had a 3-Monday course called A Taste of Judaism, which I went to. It was 2 hours, three Mondays in a row. And as they were going over, this is what Judaism teaches, I found myself saying, I believe that, I believe that, I believe that, I believe that, I believe this, I believe that. So that kind of like, maybe I should check out Judaism again. Maybe there's something different than what I was raised as a kid. And I had the good fortune of seeing a movie called The Jew and the Lotus, and reading a book about it called The Jew and the Lotus by Roger Kamenetz, about how the Dalai Lama wanted to learn how the Jews survived in exile because of his own, the Tibetan Holocaust at the hands of China.
Wow.
And there were these rabbis talking about Judaism in a way that I'd never heard before. And then I read a Globe. I live in Boston Globe article about this rabbi named Moshe Waldox, and I checked him out, and he had been a scholar, but he also was a comedian.
Oh, you gotta love that.
The big book of Jewish humor. And so I said, I got to meet this guy.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time I came to services at this temple in Brookline, he was saying, the service is like a journey, and it culminates in your silent prayer to the divine. When I heard that, I was like, no one's ever described service like a journey.
Wow.
The high point is you silently connecting with the divine. I love that. And I just took him to lunch a few times and grilled him and asked him every impossible question to see how he would respond. And he was so non-dogmatic and just like, we need joy, we need love, we need kindness.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Pro-women's rights, pro-gay rights, pro-human rights,
Imagine
pro-social justice. And you could come to shul in your torn jeans and shorts, and no one was going to give you a guilt trip about it. And I was like, I can hang out here.
I could hang out there.
Yeah. Well, I think there's no better way to end than if you could give us our listeners a little practical advice for how to handle a situation where maybe they think that perhaps they might be approached by someone who's representing maybe an unhealthy religious organization, cult, what have you, and how they can help even maybe a friend or relative who may be approached by an organization like that.
So tricky, hard question to end with, but you basically want to have a curious yet concerned posture.
That's great.
You want to not be confrontational or judgmental or use the cult word. You want to be like, tell me about who you are. What's your name? Tell me how you came to study this. What is, have you ever talked with critics or former members? If not, why not? Have you ever, read books like Combating Cult Mind Control? It's very interesting that since the book first came out in 1988 and I did an updated edition in 2015, my book is kind of like a litmus test on groups, because I find that the healthy groups are like, oh, that sounds like a cool book, I want to read it, and people will eagerly read it. And the ones that are totalitarian or mind control-ish, they just, by the title, they don't want to, they talk to their leader and, oh, that's not a good book. So it's kind of interesting. You can always, cite me and say, what do you think of Steve Hassan? Oh, he's a devil. He's really bad.
A handsome devil. A handsome devil.
He's an anti-religious bigot who kidnaps people and beats and tortures them, huh? But literally, cults will be programmed to believe that. Scientology has even some websites that say that to this day about me.
Wow.
Which I don't do that. The main thing is to understand that there's hope, that mind control isn't 100%. It doesn't erase the person's authentic self.
Wow.
And I think that the more contact a person in a destructive group has with normal people who love them and care about them and interact with them and expose them to information about the outside world, the more likely they're going to be able to be helped sooner than later.
So good.
And I guess I've just, I know we're running out of time, but over the 40 years, I kind of went from deprogramming to voluntary deprogramming, which we called exit counseling, to a process I refer to as a strategic interactive approach, where I basically meet with family and friends. I bring in ex-members, sometimes private investigators, and we meet and have an intensive for a few days, and then we plan a strategy for how to ethically influence someone who's in a totalist relationship or group, to empower them to question for themselves and leave for themselves. So that's how it's evolved over time. But that's very time intensive. It's a big project. It's not simple, but it's doable, because people want to be free. They don't want to be slaves. They don't want to be manipulated and exploited.
Wow.
Man, that's incredible. There just could be no better time than now, with everything going on in mainstream media and everything we're hearing about how crazy the world is right now. Your work is so important, Steve, and thank you so much for spending some time with us and acquainting our listeners with what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks to you. And I would just want to say, for the information control piece, that the major media are controlled by 6 basic corporations, and there's such a vital need for independent investigative journalism that isn't afraid of being sued, that isn't afraid of telling the truth for the public good. And we need more of that, more funding for that kind of information, the dispersal. And unfortunately, the big media is not helping the planet get better.
No.
Yeah.
Man.
So thanks for your podcast.
Yeah.
I wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For the folks listening, what is the best way to stay on top of what you're up to? And if there's someone out there who's in need, or they have a family member in need, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
So, freedomofmind.com, and we're very small, but we're hoping to develop training programs for mental health professionals, for activists, for families who are trying to rescue a loved one, and reading Combating Cult Mind Control and Freedom of Mind, my 2 books, are also helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, like I said before, we still look forward to this, and we know you have a very busy and sometimes unpredictable schedule, so we very much appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us, and we definitely hope to touch base with you in the future.
Thanks so much.
Blessings to you. Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Seek to destroy, Mr. Boy, when you turn on the light. Tell me your name is the same in the hush of the night. I want to treat you right.
All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that one as much as we did. The idea behind having Steve Hassan on is just a little bit of a different take, obviously, on religion and how to approach it in a safe way. But what a crazy! I mean, we didn't even get to half the questions we wanted.
It just didn't even matter.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, that guy is just an absolute catalog of information. Talk about like talking to a true like expert.
yeah,
You know, I know like the whole like Renaissance man thing is like, you know, being a little bit, you know, versed in everything and that's awesome. But man, this guy is an expert on this stuff.
crazy.
Unbelievable.
And what a wacky story.
Yeah.
Like his personal story is so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like, and I think the big takeaway for me and the thing that we were trying to highlight, I think, with some of our questions was the fact that this guy went from kind of a more strict upbringing within the church. You know, he was raised within Judaism.
Yeah, super orthodox.
To like kind of like going through his own like deconstruction.
Right.
Leading into college to going through a vulnerable period of time in his life. His girlfriend broke up with him, and being recruited into this crazy cult.
So crazy.
So then you think when this guy leaves the cult finally that he would want nothing at all to do with any kind of organized religion.
Right.
You would always have that sense of doubt in the back of your mind.
Absolutely. Like, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah, like I'm not buying anything anybody's
Screw
selling.
you guys. I'm going
Yeah,
home.
I'm going home. And yet, like he finds himself with a life of faith.
It's
like
amazing.
further on down the line, and he cherishes it. Obviously, like I recommend his book so highly. Like he speaks about it a little bit. There's obviously a lot of case studies and examples of other cult activity and ways to protect yourself. But his personal story and he still reveres that sense of spirituality and that sense of otherness,
community,
yeah,
faith, joy, freedom, welcoming the other, justice. Like this should feel like a pretty healthy, you know, thing. Like, you know what I mean? It's like this is kind of what we're all after.
Yeah.
In spirituality. I think one of the things that I really appreciated about having a guy like this on the show, which would sound kind of out of left field, right? I mean, really. But what I loved about having Hassan on is that so many people that are listening to this program have probably wondered if they've experienced any kind of sense of like disillusionment from religion or some kind of event or some kind of tragedy, some kind of trauma in their faith. They probably wonder like, man, like, was I just brainwashed as a kid into believing this? Like, was I, and exposing yourself to Steve's level of work really reveals that, you know, there are ways to kind of look at how to think for yourself, and it doesn't mean you've got to just scrap everything. Like just knowing the vocabulary, knowing, you know, the bite model, knowing just to identify some of these things that he calls like undue influence. That, you know what, like I remember being a kid and being like, man, I was just brainwashed. Like I just didn't have a choice or whatever. And now looking back and knowing some of Steve's stuff, like I don't really feel like that anymore. And so I think that a lot of people listening to this show, this is going to clear up a whole lot of, there might be people that are wondering, like, did I just get hamstrung into believing, you know, this, that, or the other thing? And it's like, well, maybe, but focus on the fact that you do have the ability to have a free mind right now and to think and to take the journey and to do it yourself. Like, don't let anyone do it for you. I thought that fit in so well to what we're all about. It's not about just saying, like, yeah, it's all bad, just burn the whole thing down. It's like, no, like quit putting it on other people. Like first you believe by proxy, and then the retaliation to believing by proxy is almost like just pure disassociation from everything, which is another kind of just, you're still letting them control you at that point.
Right.
Freedom of mind says, I'm going to take the journey myself.
100%, man. I could not agree with that more. I think the overall theme was just like, yeah, think for yourself, take the journey, take your journey.
Right.
Instead of letting, as you said, someone else take that journey for you. And I think he had some really practical, kind of almost common sense methods for determining if you are entering into kind of an unhealthy religious situation. So one of the things that we really were trying to get into, but didn't quite, reference, I guess, specifically throughout the episode is he does define, and again, go out and get his book. There's so much information. There's so many stories, case studies of different scenarios with various different cults.
Yeah.
And beyond just dealing with cults, he does a ton of work with sex trafficking and other, different organizations that utilize kind of the same.
Like the media.
Yeah. So so he breaks down, there are 4 main types of cults. Religious cults, which are probably the ones that we're most familiar with.
Sure, that's what you-
Jonestown.
Right. The Path.
Yes.
We didn't get to The Path on Hulu.
Myerism. which if you read Steve
Is he
Hatz's
dead?
book,
Is he not dead? Meyer, is he?
oh gosh,
We need to do an episode on The Path.
I think people need to read Hassan's book, then watch The Path, like I did, and I was like, oh man,
Oh, man.
yep, they're doing that, and they're doing that.
Oh, my gosh.
It just totally made it a that much more enjoyable experience for me. But so there's religious cults, there are political cults, there are psychotherapy / educational cults, and even commercial cults. So I know he references like there are, kind of bad business practices,
Like pyramid scheme marketing.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not just the crazy religious, like a bunch of dudes wearing white robes, type of religious cult, with the white bearded father figure, at the top.
Yeah.
They come in many different, many different types and styles and that sort of thing. So anyway, the bite model I think is really interesting. His bite model that he uses to kind of like break down what constitutes a destructive cult, and we will definitely link that in the show notes. And his website has a ton of information, videos, and speaking engagements that he's done. And the guy's been on like I think every news program known to man.
Man,
There's
he's
50
been on everything. He's been on Oprah, CNN. Just
Dr. Phil.
Yeah, Dr. Phil. This is the guy you call in when you want to talk about cult behavior and mind control.
Yeah. So the important thing, though, is that one of the things we really want to talk about at the end was kind of ways to protect yourself. And the big thing is these are just practical ways to just the underlying theme really is just find out more information, like know what you're getting into.
Just ask good questions.
So he says, don't give them any of your personal information right off the bat. Take their information instead. Research who their leader is, like the leader of the organization that's approaching you. And see if there's any negative stories. Like with Google now, we have all this information at our fingertips. How is the organization structured? Is all the power located at the top? What is the group's doctrine? Do they freely give out information about the organization? Like if you have to pry to find out what they're all about, that's probably not a good sign. And what does membership consist of? Like what are their recruitment practices? What does group maintenance look like? And ultimately, do you have the freedom to leave? Because if you don't, that is definitely a bad sign.
Dude.
Although our church locks the door as soon as you get... I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Sorry, Simon, I'm kidding.
Just kidding, Simon. Kind of.
So yeah, I just hope that was beneficial, at the very least interesting.
So interesting, man.
If by chance, because we know we have a wide audience that spans over almost 70 countries, and ton of different states across the United States of America. So if you know someone, if it's you or if you have friends or family members or know someone that might be in a negative situation, we do have some really great resources. If you go to our show notes, there's a link to Freedom of Mind, their website, where they have resources and people you can reach out to help that friend or family member. So if that's you or someone that don't hesitate to reach out and at least get some answers.
Absolutely. Man, that was fun.
That was so much fun. And if you like the music, it's a gentleman from England across the pond named George Cosby. And you will find his information in the show notes as well. You can find his music on Spotify, iTunes, and all the major music
I love it.
resources.
It's there. It's
Yeah.
there for you to find.
Check it out,
and
man.
enjoy.
He's up and coming, so he's been in a couple different magazines, on Artists on the Rise. So check it out. You may have heard it here first, at least in the States. So.
I hope so.
Yeah,
For his sake and for the listeners.
absolutely.
We got anything else?
That's it, man.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for being with us today for another episode, and we will be talking at you again soon. Grace and peace, everyone. Keep deconstructing.
When shopping for Black Friday appliance deals, you want to pay less, and you probably think that means heading to a big box store. But for the best appliance deals, remember, Bray beats big. So skip Black Friday and get to Bray Friday, going on now at Bray and Scarf. Save up to 40% on select appliances, and get doorbuster savings on our best-selling GE Profile and Cafe appliances. Save now during Bray Friday at Bray and Scarf, where it doesn't cost more to get more.